And I start going, well, in Genesis, Adam and Eve, God's promises. And I just started like listing off this like rhetoric that I was trained in. And I stopped mid sentence and went, I've been brainwashed.
Well, John, thank you so much for joining me on Growing Up Fundie. I'm really excited to have you on this episode. I was digging around on your website, on your podcast. I was creeping. He sent me the links, everybody. I wasn't being a creep. He sent me the links. And you just have a fascinating story. You have just an interesting story, interesting background details. And I wanted to give you the opportunity to tell your story in your own words. And so I know you have a whole podcast. Anybody who's listening to this, clearly you like deconstruction podcasts and things like that. So please check out Cult of Christianity. But enough for me. Tell us a little bit about yourself, John.
Yeah, I mean, my journey took a lot of winding roads, as they say. So I
Yeah.
started off quite religious, particularly a Reformed Calvinist version of
Wow.
evangelical, which is the PCA, which is Presbyterian Church in America. It's one of the more conservative denominations in the U.S. Um,
Yeah.
they're a bit more heady than your typical evangelical, meaning they like their books, they like their tradition. They are particularly a little obsessed with the Reformation, the period where Protestantism started. And to give you some context clues, the denomination was started. Its original name was the Confederate Presbyterian Church of America, so that'll kind of
Oh
give you some
boy.
context clues
Oh
of kind
boy.
of their vibe. Yeah, my dad was an elder in the church. I grew up, actually a fairly skeptical child in a lot of ways. I didn't really officially convert till I was 11 years old, which is kind of late in those circles.
Interesting.
Because I was really concerned about trusting the Bible was actually my first concern. I was like, what? Like, just immediately confused by it. Like, why are we treating this book so special?
Yeah.
And so eventually I was converted. I was convinced. And I really did take ownership of that faith pretty early. Had some Bible camp experiences, what have you, had some kind of stereotypical plot points there. But it really started intensifying around the age of 17 when I felt God's call to be a pastor. And I put that in air quotes because I really don't know what that means. I still
Right.
can't explain it to this day.
Right.
But I convinced myself I felt it. So I thought I was supposed to be a pastor, that God was telling me to go be a pastor. And in the tradition I grew up in, you really don't become a pastor without a master's degree. But I was a little too impatient, and I was already a little bit trying to distance myself from my tradition I grew up in, and wanted to have kind of a more typical, maybe non-denom type faith that was
Right.
a little bit more emotional and less heady. So I looked around for an undergrad degree in preaching, and the one I found was Moody Bible Institute. And at the
Yep.
time, they were decently reputable. That has gone by the wayside. Um, and I went to their secondary campus, not the one in Chicago, but the one that
Oh,
used
okay.
to exist in Spokane, Washington. It has been shut down.
Oh,
Um,
interesting. I didn't know about that one. I used to live right down the street from the Chicago one.
oh, fun. I'm sorry. And yeah, so I went there. I got my degree. I got my Bachelor of Arts in Biblical Exposition with an interdisciplinary in literature, both ancient and English. And you know, kind of had a rough time, to be honest. I really enjoyed my classes. I enjoyed my studies. But I didn't enjoy the culture at all. It was the most Christians I think I'd ever been around in one spot.
Yeah.
I didn't grow up going to mega churches or anything. I grew up going to fairly small churches. So it was a little overwhelming. And at the secondary campus of Moody, most of the majors were specifically Bible degrees. So pretty much everyone there was going into ministry,
Yeah.
which was kind of intense because people going into ministry have a certain level of narcissism as part of it, but also,
Yeah.
just like have a certain level of passion that makes every kind of moment with fellow students very existential and like unnecessarily philosophical. So it just becomes quite a intense environment.
Interesting. And something that I heard about at least the Chicago Moody, and I'm curious if this is true about the Washington Moody, is that, and I thought this was quite clever, that if you get accepted into Moody, you go for free.
No, but that is what they tell people. So this is
Okay. I was
it's layered.
wondering.
So what they call it tuition pay, or yeah, it's paid tuition, free tuition. They use some sort of term. In Chicago, they didn't do this in Washington, but in Chicago, how that works is they have such a surplus of donors, that your tuition is paid for, but you still pay for things like room and board, and they still have a
Right.
bunch of fees, and they still have a bunch of other things. And it's not really every student, and that kind of used to be the case more decades ago, but my understanding is that a lot of that's gone away, and they supplement a lot of it with student loans still. So it's not like they're paying for it all. You're
Got
still
it.
going to end up with loans.
Got it.
But no, that is a very true like thing that a lot of people apply to Moody because they hear the rumor that it's free.
Right. Right.
It's not.
You're like, nope, it sure ain't.
It's not. It's cheap though. I will say that it's affordable. It's way more affordable than most education.
Wow, that's good.
And of course, education being in parentheses, or air quotes. But yeah, again, it was a challenging time, but I did eventually meet a girl who I married, and then was full on ready to go into ministry. But my graduating year was 2016, and so
Yikes.
things got a little tense on campus.
Yeah.
From 15 to 16. And I was not surprised that a lot of evangelicals chose Trump over Hillary. I was
Right.
very surprised that they revered him. That was
Right.
very confusing to me. I was like, this is literally like he would be kicked out of Moody for his
Right.
behavior. Like
Right.
I was like, this doesn't make any sense. Until of course, like I started thinking about it more, and I was like, this is actually a pattern I've seen throughout my whole life of like kind of narcissistic men being supported and
Yeah.
forgiven for anything, as long as they use the right spiritual language. And
Yep.
so, fast forward through a couple of years out of Moody, I, wasn't. I was doing some ministerial jobs, but nothing full time. And was pretty miserable in both my marriage and just my life and in everything.
Yeah.
And came home to divorce papers that I was not expecting, and kind of did a little spiral, tried to cling to my faith really hard just one last time.
Right.
But really what ended up happening was seeing how not only I was treated, but how my ex-spouse was treated, because of not only divorce, but because in our attempts to try to mend things, we were not doing it the way our local church wanted us to, because it wasn't, Bible-based counseling or whatever. And so
Right.
I had just had enough. It kind of all clicked at once, but the moment that I've shared before is the moment where someone was asking me while I was, terribly depressed, trying to figure out what my life had become. They were like, "Well, you've been through such trauma, and this person had been through such trauma." And they're like, "Why does God let this happen?" Classic problem of evil question, right?
Right.
And I start going, well, in Genesis, Adam and Eve, God's promises. And I just started like listing off this like rhetoric that I was trained in. And I stopped mid sentence and went, I've been brainwashed. And
Yeah.
I literally stopped. I was like, I've been brainwashed. I'm in a cult. Like it just kind of like hit me all at once
Yeah.
because I was just saying things I didn't believe.
Yeah.
And kind of,
Yeah.
it's not like I wrote a book and then had a podcast the next day, but that was definitely a plot point where I started deconstructing, and I started
Yeah.
really diving into less so theology, but more so just like how these behaviors and group dynamics tend to work out, which is why,
Yeah.
I investigate other cults now. That kind of led
Yeah.
me, I kind of fell
Yeah.
into a career investigating
That's
cult and Christianity.
that's how that happens, isn't it? Like,
Yeah.
that's how that happens. This is not what I thought I would be doing at 32.
Right.
I gotta be honest with you. So you describe this feeling of mistrust of the
Mhm.
Bible at first when you're like, this seems like, why are we taking this so seriously? Did that ever truly go away? Was that kind of in the back of your mind all the time? Or was there something that kind of brushed it to the side for a while?
It's probably a little bit of both. I mean, I think the thing
Yeah.
that brushed it to the side was, well, I've had a spiritual encounter with Jesus, so it doesn't matter. My doubts don't matter
Yeah. And
because
also
I
hell
don't.
will do that too.
In the back of your mind, right? I was actually kind of I was skeptical of hell pretty much my entire Christian walk.
Interesting.
I wasn't very out about it because you'll get freaking slapped in the face at a Bible
Yeah.
college if you start talking about it.
Yeah.
But I'm not really, hell always really bothered me. It didn't make sense, and I didn't necessarily think it was a essential doctrine for Christianity. But yes, I mean, everyone I was around would have the rhetoric, so the neuropaths are there, whether I like it or not. So yeah, that played into it. But then also, yeah, as far as like the Bible, I mean, I studied it. I studied Hebrew. I read parts of it in its as close as we can get to its original language. I cared about the Bible a lot, and my degree is in the Bible, so like I feel like I had a good grip on it. I I think as far as skepticism about how Christians use the Bible, I don't know if that ever went away. I was like, this seems like crazy that so many people believe this without even bothering to know what the original language is, much less study it. And then also to like not be able to say, what year approximately a book came out in. There's just the ignorance of Christians with the Bible is kind of what stood out to me. Is it's like, boy, we're putting a lot of trust in this thing that most people don't know a lot about.
Right.
And that was
Most people have not
definitely a red
read.
flag.
Yeah, most people have not read cover to cover.
No.
And most of the people I know who have are not religious anymore because they
Yeah,
read
I
it
mean, I
cover
did
to
it
cover.
twice, so
Yeah.
add me to the list.
Yeah. Yeah. And so after you went through your divorce and you kind of were ostracized, it sounds like, socially by that group, did you feel like that was kind of the push you needed to leave the faith, or was it more of like a painful chase away type experience? Did you feel like, oh, finally I can just kind of explore my own thing, or is it more like I lost everyone, what do I do now? And then you eventually stumbled into deconstruction?
Um, I first stumbled into bars, is what I did, to be frank. I
Yeah.
really didn't take the time to ponder too much. I just drank to not feel.
Wow.
So you know, that's a beautiful framing. I don't know if I'm ready to accept it, but it might be the push I needed.
Yeah.
I think that's possible. I also think that what I truly think, to be very frank, is that I was turning into like a very sociopathic person, and I think my faith was enabling me to do that. Not just in like kind of like big behavior plot points, but more so just like in my entire being. Like I didn't see people as people anymore. My entire world was self-contained, and a lot of that was born out of the shame of not living up to the impossible standard that is Christianity, which is to be like so many things, whether it be pure, whether it be um, well behaved in church, whether it be submissive to authority, to try to be all those things and then also appealing to an outside world as a person, and just trying to like be both those things. You can't do it. It's literally
Right.
impossible. And
Right.
so I think honestly, I was so depressed that what I really yes, I think my marriage needed to end for many reasons, but I also think I needed to hit rock bottom because
Yeah.
if frankly, when I was going through it, it wasn't just that I was ostracized. In fact, in some ways, it was the opposite. It was in the realization that a lot of the Christian men who I admired were so ready to take my side and so ready for me to throw my ex spouse under the bus, like without any base, without any reason. From conversation one, I'd be like,
Well,
so, me and
obviously.
my ex have separated. And the first thing they want to say is, like, what did she do?
Yeah,
That was
she led
honestly
you from
more,
Christ. That's what she
it must
did. She
be.
led you away from Christ.
It must be. They didn't have a rationale for any other thing. I mean, here I am with a Bible degree. I can't be that bad, can I? And like
No, no,
that,
no.
and that was sort of like a crisis in and of itself, of realizing that actually I could have played ball and like used their language and done fine. And like that was kind of like that was honestly more haunting than anything else. And I think
Yeah.
kind of the kick in the ass I needed to be like, this is a cult, and if I stay in this, I'll become a cult leader. I need to get out.
Yeah, it's like once there's a very fine line between becoming a martyr at your church and totally exiting entirely and deconstructing and figuring out what else you want to do with your life. Like, it is
Yeah.
so easy to go in either direction, especially with kind of what you're talking about, where everyone is so willing to go, you're a man of God. Obviously,
Hmm.
she was the problem.
Hmm.
And I think that's such an interesting way to look at it. Like, no, it was both of us. Like, we needed
Yep.
to end this marriage, but the fact that everyone is so willing to throw her under the bus kind of reveals who they are. And either you want to be a part of that or you don't.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean that's combined with a million other things, right?
Right.
In the opening chapter of my book, I'm 16 years old, being called to my church to, and elders are telling me my long hair is sinful, and I've had long hair ever since. You know, like there's always been a part of me that has been like, don't don't add rules to the supposedly love God, love your neighbor stuff. And what it really comes down to is they just don't believe that. I mean, like
Right.
they don't believe that it's just about loving God and loving your neighbor. And the ones that do still don't understand what love is because they conflate love with obedience to
Right.
certain sets of dogma. So yeah, I mean
Love your
it
neighbor as long as your neighbor is doing everything the right way. If they're not,
right.
woof, stay away.
Right. Or even further, love your neighbor by cursing them. You know, like that, like literally like love your neighbor by abusing them. And I think in my not so humble opinion, that this entire world can't really produce anything good because it's not designed to. I think the entire world of Christianity is designed to produce like cult leaders and cult followers.
Yes. Yep.
And you kind of have to choose which one you want to be, and I don't want to be either of those things.
Right.
And I don't
Right.
think I ever did want to be either of those things. I just was convinced that's not what was going on.
Yeah. So interesting. And so the minute that you realized, oh my gosh, I've been in a cult, was that a scary moment? Was that
Mhm.
a I finally have answers for what I've been feeling moment? A little bit of everything? I get a lot of messages from people who are in that moment right now where they're like,
Mhm.
"Oh my goodness. Whoa." And they have
Mhm.
no idea what to do next. And so what did you do next?
I mean, it is terrifying. I think was the biggest
Yeah.
feeling. And there's many reasons for the fear, but the biggest reason you feel fear in that moment is because you've been indoctrinated to feel fear in that moment. And for me, the fear was kind of twofold. There's like the fear of, is God going to kill me? And then there's the fear of,
Yep. Yep.
will I have any kind of network or support system if I leave? And I think
Yes.
that is like, honestly, was way more scary to me than anything else.
Totally.
Um, and I think that's true for many people. I also think that as far as people not really knowing what to do, I don't think there's the right answer. I really don't. For me, it was let's go get duct tape, aka alcohol, and throw it on my wounds. And do I think advocate for alcoholism? No, but I'm like
No.
I needed alcohol in that
Yeah.
moment in order to
Yeah.
survive, in order to not jump off a bridge. And
Right.
I really think for people like they might have a period where they need to just indulge a vice a little bit, or if they're in the healthier mindset, go to therapy. It took me years to want to do that.
Yep.
But there's no right answers. I mean, it's just terrifying,
Right.
and each individual is going to have to kind of process through
Right.
that on their own. I would
Right.
just say don't be afraid of leaving. I think like
Yeah.
in as much as you can, like understand that is a viable option. Don't like
Right.
say that's the one thing I can't do, because when you're there, you're still stuck in the cold.
Absolutely. And I remember with me personally, I was like, I know that I don't want to do this anymore. What now? And
Hmm.
my first thought was, I don't know, what does someone who doesn't go to church anymore do? They sleep in
Yeah.
on Sundays? So I started sleeping in on Sundays. Like step 1, I just slept in on Sundays. It's like, okay, not bad. Didn't get struck by lightning. What else do they do? They stop posting Bible verses on Instagram. Okay, so I stopped doing that. Okay, didn't get struck by lightning. Sometimes it's baby steps. Some people
Definitely.
dive right in and they're like, I gotta read everything and watch everything and stream everything. And other people are like, I know that I'm doing this, but I would rather talk about literally anything else. I'm gonna get a hobby.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and neither
They
one of those are wrong.
Well, and cult shopping is a real thing that a lot of cult scholars
Yes.
talk about, where you leave one ideology, you're desperate for another, like coercive group, and another kind of radical ideology in order to satiate your neuropaths that have been designed to be like you when you've been designed to be an evangelist, like and you do see this online in the deconstruction community, to be frank, is like you want to become an evangelist for a different ideology. And like, and part of me
Yes.
thinks that's okay, but like part of me is also like, slow down. Like, it's okay to like take those baby steps. I'm glad you say that. I'm definitely on board with baby steps.
Yes, yes. And like I totally recognize that I am an evangelist for deconstruction. Like I get it. I get that like the exact same complaints that I have about people like Joel Osteen, you know,
Hmm.
people might be able to say about me. I'm
Hmm.
flattered they think I'm that rich. Thank you. But you know, like, well, you're on there telling people what to think. But the difference is I'm not telling people what to think.
Right.
I interview Christians on here. I interview
Hmm.
Catholic people on here. Sorry if I offended anybody who thinks that Christians and Catholics are the same thing. It's an entire ordeal. Um, I interview people who are members of the Nation of Islam on here. Like, I'm
Hmm.
at no point am I saying this is how you should live. I'm saying these are people's stories. These are the
Hmm.
things that they did. These and maybe you see yourself in these stories, right? And so I just wanted to throw that out there because I have heard that a lot where people are like, well, when atheists get podcasts and YouTube channels, that's the same thing. Some people it is. I have seen some
Hmm.
people and I've had some guests before where I've been like, whoa, wait a second, what's the
Yeah.
difference between what you're doing and the stuff that you're saying
Right.
about other people? But for the most part, you have to look at I don't feel like convincing anyone of anything because
Right.
that's not true belief. I've said that a million times on this podcast. True belief is when you're exposed to something and you're also exposed to everything outside of it and you dig around and you do your research and you listen and you stream and you watch and you're like, "You know what? But at the end of the day, I still feel like that first thing was really who I am." That's belief, not
Hmm.
I'm doing this because of hellfire and brimstone, or I'm
Right.
doing this because cool people on the internet told me I had to do that, you know? Um,
Right. Yeah. Well, and there's a big difference between advocating for something that is a toxic belief that you should
right,
not believe
right.
versus advocating for something that is supposedly going to heal all your problems if you just
Yes,
say, I believe this. Those are like
and also
categorically
send
two
money.
different things. And yeah, and then there's the money component, the power component,
Right,
the lifelong servitude component.
right.
So it's definitely a different thing. Even the most zealous people who might annoy me online who aren't Christians are still not going to annoy me as much as someone who is, in my opinion, recruiting for a cult and in
Right.
denial about
Right, right. There are a few where I'm like, "Stop, you're ruining it." Like,
it.
"Stop, you're driving
Or-
people away."
yeah, I mean, there's annoying people in every space and in every
Right.
ideology, but it's and even toxicity. But it's
Yeah.
not as baked in, and it's not as like all agreed to like it is in Christianity, where you are kind of
Right.
all agreeing to a dogma that you're going to like propagate.
Right, right, and when I'm listening to annoying people in my sphere, there's no punishment for turning them off. There's no, like,
Right.
eternal damnation for not listening to them. I
And
just
you
don't
you
listen
don't
to
have to
them.
you don't have to convince yourself in your mind somehow that they're your family. I mean, like these are the things that Christianity teaches, and not just the like
Yes.
happy version or the like extreme versions or even the fundamentalist versions, if you want to call it that. Like all Christianity does require some dogma that is like cultish, and like this
Yeah.
is why I
Yes.
started kind of just focusing on white evangelicalism and like being a little bit kinder to the more progressive varieties of Christianity. And I still am kinder because if you're going to be a Christian,
Yeah.
please be a progressive one.
Right.
But at the same time, I'm like, there's inescapable doctrines that this faith teaches, and I think
Right.
you can draw pretty clear parallels between cult recruitment and cult enforcement from those ideologies, and I think it necessarily breeds some of those, which is very
Right.
different than everyone just kind of doing their own thing and saying,
Right.
"Hey, these ideas are harmful." That's not really an ideology. That's pointing to a fact. That's criticism.
Right. Right. And also something that I think is important to point out about people who study cults like you is that I'm willing to bet, maybe, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I know that I feel this way and several people I know feel this way. We also have problems with coercive recruitment to anything else. Like
Yeah.
I have a problem with the military being in the lunch cafeteria. I have a
Hmm.
problem with that. You know, I have
Yeah.
a problem with MLMs. I have a problem
Yeah.
with these like gym cults. So, you know, it's not even like, oh, I'm here to like attack
Right.
Christians and Christians alone. It's like, no, cults in general, cult
Hmm.
mentality in general is a problem. And this like familial absorption, like even some Greek life can be cultish if you're not careful, right?
Hmm.
So that consistency, I think, is also what sets us apart from being the same as the other side. The Christian version is,
Yeah.
at least we're consistent. We're like, "No, we don't like any of you. Get all of it out of here."
Yeah. Well, like a perfect example is I like sports, and I will be the first to say that like there can be really culty environments in sports.
Yes.
It's not even from a place of what my preferences are, right? It's from
Right.
a place of the observable behavior that you can like track
Right.
and spot patterns.
Right. And so, how far into your realization, when you're like, okay, so I'm in a cult, oh my goodness, how far into that realization were you comfortable reading and studying on these things without it being way too close to home or scary or threatening in any way?
So I'm laughing because it started when I was homeless living in a van, and
Hey, you
that's
know what?
yeah, that's
Sometimes that's
when
what it takes.
yeah. I mean, like in all seriousness, when you are homeless and you're living in a van, and your biggest problem is what am I going to eat today? The existential questions suddenly become a lot less scary,
Yeah.
because
Yep.
you're like, who cares? Like, it's like I just gotta eat. And so like I started writing my book when I was in that van. So, and that was, let's see, I mean, 2019 when I started writing, and I had kind of stopped going to church sometime in 2018. So yeah, I mean, not that long. It really is like, once you kind of it's a thread, right? Like once you pull the thread, a lot starts unraveling. So yeah, it was not long at all. And I think that was good. But after I published my book, I was still struggling to say I'm not a Christian out loud.
It's hard. It's
Yeah,
really hard to do.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's like those phrases took longer. I still like when people ask about my spirituality, I still kind of dodge the question. To be frank, I'm like, I don't want you to know. I think it's T. Levings who says I'm spiritually private. I'm like, I'm stealing that from you.
I like that. That should be a
Yeah,
tattoo. Like, I'm
yeah,
spiritually
I'm
private.
spiritually private. And I think we'd all be better off if we were, to be frank. And yeah, so it took time, but I think I it was 22 years of that shit. So like
Right.
it's kind of like a soda bottle you shake up. Like it's like eventually you're just like, let it all out. I'm done. And in a lot of ways, my book was that, and that's why I don't even promote my book very much, because in a lot of ways, I think I would write a better one now. It's just I needed to get a lot out. I need to be like, I was just in a cult. Please hear me. I was just in a cult.
Yeah.
It's crazy. This is
Yeah.
crazy. And then of course, from there is when I started the podcast, and the podcast is when I really found that I liked interviewing people and kind of investigating matters on a more deep scale, which is what led me to like NYU to study journalism. And now that's why I like do investigate cults that are outside of Christianity, but also the Christian ones are always going to be the ones that I kind of like intuitively understand very quickly.
Yeah, yeah, and so you graduate in May, right? With your
Correct.
I was about to
Yes.
say MFA, that's mine. Your master's will be in
Not
journalism, right?
correct.
That's
Yes.
awesome. And so, do you think you'll write another book? I know you're wrapping up your podcast, right? The last season
Correct.
starts
Yeah.
on
Last
Easter.
season.
Why did that happen? Just moving on,
Um.
doing other things?
Yeah. It's my baby, and baby's grown up. Like I mean,
Yeah,
like it's like I'll still be doing stuff in this field for a long time.
yeah,
I don't know if I even can articulate any reason, but it is the final season. It is time to say goodbye to
yeah,
that particular podcast. It doesn't mean there might not be like a similar one in the future. Who knows? But yeah, it's cool. So yes, I don't know about writing another book. Surely in my
yeah,
lifetime, it'll happen. But
yeah.
I'm not putting any work into it right now. Mostly, I'm investigating like lots of it's unfortunate when I'm investigating things I can't talk about it too much, but yeah, there's quite a few stories I've been working hard over the past several months reporting on, and hopefully going to publish this year. And yeah, so I am writing a lot, I am recording a lot, I'm doing a lot of things. And
Good,
yeah, I'm
good.
very excited to graduate, and I turned 30 the day before I graduate,
Yay!
and so
That's awesome.
it does feel kind of like a chapter turning moment, so that's fun.
Yeah, that's cool. And so are you on campus for NYU, or are you virtual
No, I'm
or
remote. So I live in
remote? Okay,
Atlanta.
cool. Got it.
And
Got it.
yeah, I'm remote. It's been wonderful though. Truly one of the best experiences of my life, and one of my favorite moments I'm looking forward to is when I get that diploma, I'm gonna take my Moody diploma out and I'm gonna put that NYU one in, and it's gonna feel real good.
That's funny. That's going to be a good feeling. Because I was about to
Hmm.
say, will you stay in New York? And then I was like, wait a second. I don't think you're in New York. Wait a second.
No,
Um,
I gotta stay in the Bible Belt.
oh yeah. Oh yeah. And see, that's the other thing is like when you start projects like this, you're like, I want to get out of here. And then you're like, but if I leave, then there's none of us here. So
Yeah.
dadgummit. Like
Yeah.
it's like a double-edged sword.
Well, and to be frank, it's a redemption arc for me. Like I feel very responsible for causing a lot of harm when I was a Christian. And even further
Yeah.
than that, I feel very privileged to be kind of like one of the straight white guys who got to see Christianity from that lens and got to escape from that lens.
Yeah.
And I better use that privilege because I can go places some other people can't. I can talk to people some people can't, and I can investigate some churches kind of undetected, like some people can't. And I wouldn't call it a moral obligation. That's probably a little strong. But it's something that I think is part of my redemption story for me personally.
Well, and I thought that was interesting because in the notes that you sent me, you said something similar, and I read that on I think your website as well. It when I read that, it almost drew kind of a parallel to church in that
Mhm.
so much of Christianity is repenting and asking forgiveness and making up for past transgressions. And so when you said that, when you're like, I'm kind of repenting for all the damage I did, I'm like, oh, there it is. Like we're still
Yeah.
deconstructing a little bit. That part of us will always be
Yeah.
there almost.
Yeah, and I think that's actually like I want to be careful here, but like that's some of what Christianity gets right about the human experience is that like no matter how broken you are, you can be made whole again. It's just their means are to exploit you in a cult. And like
Yes.
my and like I don't care for any I don't need to enforce forgiveness onto anyone else. Or like a redemption arc onto anyone else. I just know for me personally that it feels good to be a good person for the first time in my life. And when I was
Yes.
and when I was a Christian, I just simply wasn't one. I just knew how to pretend to be one. And I'm sure I have friends who
Truly.
would say, "You were fine. You weren't as bad as," but it doesn't matter because I know what internally was going
Yes.
on.
That is You articulated something I've been trying to articulate for 2 decades now. This idea that when I was my most religious, I know for a fact people around me were like, "Sydney's so good. She's such a
Hmm.
sweetie. She's such a good person. Like, Sydney's such a good girl, yada, yada, yada." And I was a bad person. I was
Yeah.
not a good person. I was fake. I was
Hmm.
vindictive. I was judgmental. I thought that I was like so much better than everybody else. And I remember being proud of that piety that I thought I had
Hmm.
over everybody else. And I remember the feeling of kind of like pompous arrogance when you can tell you're Christianing right. When you're
Hmm.
like,
Yeah.
like this is the feeling. Like I
Yeah.
would hate her. If we met on the street, I would be like, that girl is a fake bitch, right? Um,
Well, and the piety thing is so fascinating too, right? Because it's like it can even work on a level that it sounds different than maybe people outside the cult would understand, which is that for me, I felt radically loving because, I was comfortable using trans people's pronouns as a Christian. Like I was super woke for doing that. When it's like now I'm just like, well, yeah, that's like bare minimum respect. So it's like, and like it's funny how like there were other things like that as a Christian where I was like, yeah, no, I am a woke Christian. We weren't saying that back then, but like,
yeah.
I was a woke evangelical, but now I look back and I was like, you were like conservative, you were, like all these other ideologies. I called myself a feminist, and yet was super just like objectifying of women just in my brain alone, and not to mention like
Yes.
any action. And so it's like,
Yes.
yeah, the whole the whole kit and caboodle experience of someone who has to grow up in a cult like that is it's very like anxiety inducing. It's very like hard to escape. I mean, there's so much social cost, and there's also so much personal cost when leaving.
Truly.
And so yeah, I definitely am glad I got out. But man, yeah, the totally agree with you that like even the best Christians have like problems going on in their
Yes.
mind.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And so what would you say has been the most expensive cost? in
Mhm.
terms of emotions, spirituality,
Oof.
personal relationships? Like, what's been the most costly aspect of deconstructing?
How deep do you wanna get?
I mean,
'Cause,
what you feel like sharing?
um, uh, death is way harder now, I'll admit it. Um,
Yeah.
when a loved one dies, it's harder. I'm not gonna deny that. I'm working on it. I've gotten better than when I started, but man, letting go of the fact that I'll never see such and such again, or if I do, it'll be a pleasant surprise. It's not something I believe right now. Um, man, that's hard. Like that is heavy stuff. Especially I've lost a lot of people in my life, and so like in a lot of in a sense, like kind of Christianity exploited my grief of some of the people I love the most. And every time one of them died, I like immediately my first thought had to be Christian dogma, and that sucks. It sucks to have to like say, you know what, I might not. All I have is their legacy, and I have to appreciate that for what it is. I got there, but it was not easy.
Yeah, absolutely. And see, it's interesting that you say death is the harder part because I almost feel like it's the easier part for the same reason that
Right.
you feel like it's the harder part. Where
Yeah.
I think some people go, "Oh man, I'm never going to see that person again." Like that's really tough to kind of wrap my brain around and they're not anywhere waiting for me or watching me or
Right.
anything like that. I think like have you ever been put under anesthesia?
Oh yeah.
Have you ever? I to me, that was, like, the most blissful sleep I've ever gotten, and I think about that, and I'm happy for them. I'm like "Wow, lights out.
Yeah.
Wow." Like, yeah, like,
Right.
obviously, I just had a friend pass away on Monday, and
I'm
it's
sorry.
so weird to think that she's not here anymore.
Yeah.
How odd. I still can't talk about her in the past tense because to me it's like
Yeah.
until especially with like social media and stuff, until I'm in the town we both lived and I recognize she's not there because of social media, she's as
Mm,
far away as she's always been, you know? And so
yeah.
that's weird and it's a bummer, a big time to know that people as awesome as those types of people aren't in heaven celebrating, you know, partying, doing things like that. Um, I don't know, but at the same time, the finality feels like it feels like the closure that I need at the same time. Thinking that people are in heaven, you're constantly like, I hope I'm not pissing them off. I hope I'm not making them upset. You know, like think about what your grandma would say or do, or your
Right.
parents are watching you. How often are they watching me? Like, are they like all the
Yeah.
time?
Yeah.
But at least having that finality maybe feels good.
I
I
think
don't
it
know.
can. I think
Yeah.
I just selfishly I was always able to like buy into the Calvinist lie that like heaven will feel good to me at the time, and like I won't, the dread was really like, what about my loved ones who don't believe in Jesus? Are they burning in hell? Like that obviously is it's tragic, and I'm very glad to have that belief in the trash can.
Right.
But for me, I was able to like rationalize that belief through the idea of like, well, when I'm made new, I'll see it as love or mercy or whatever kind of crazy mental gymnastics I had to do to believe the things I believe. So to kind of start from zero and like face death with nothing, with like
Yeah.
you gotta, no one knows, and you just kind of have to decide what you believe.
Yep.
That was tough. I mean, it was, and it wasn't like never kept me an inch closer to Christianity once I started leaving, but it hurt. I mean, it just
Yeah.
really hurt bad.
Yeah, and I think that's another misconception is people think that when Christians deconstruct into whether it's atheist, agnostic, they don't have a title, whenever they just stop being Christians, I think they think that there's like a party where we're like, "Woohoo, we can do drugs and have sex and do all this stuff we always wanted to do and snort coke." And when in reality, there's like a grieving process.
Yeah.
There's a sad, depressing, oftentimes angry process we have to get through first where we're like, "Everyone lied.
Mhm.
They all lied." And I feel like
Yeah.
I've wasted decades of my life,
Yeah.
and it's not
Not
fun.
to not to even mention, like, I mean, at least in my case and many others, there's a big period of abstinence from sex. There's also usually a big period of like fear of everything you were told was going to kill you. Um, I don't know a single person who said I want to do drugs or I want to have sex and that's why I'm leaving Christianity.
No.
I know one person who makes that joke pretty often, and I know she's lying.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I'm like the deal is that if you leave Christianity, you are you are never doing it for your own benefit. To be frank, I mean maybe for your own mental health, maybe to like heal yourself, but
Literally.
you really facing a harsh reality in the mirror.
Yes.
Cults, like I mean, there's so many things people miss when they leave Christianity. It's just not Jesus. I mean, the thing people miss is like um, you know, having routine, like having somewhere to go on Sunday where there's going to be people who might give you a hug or a handshake. They miss things like singing together. That's not something we really do culturally, except at like concerts.
Right.
And like they miss child care for free. They miss like having meals with people.
Yes.
Those are the things they miss because it is very hard to do those things outside of like a controlled environment like that.
Yeah.
Um,
Especially in your 30s. Nobody wants to hang out in your 30s. They
Definitely not.
don't.
And I mean, I don't either. Like everybody stay away. But
Yeah.
like,
Same. I am
but
one of those people that do not want to hang out in my 30s.
right. But there's a lot of. I always say dive bars are the real church. I think that's where people should go. But not if alcohol's not your thing, of course. And it's complex. Everyone's different. My bigger point is really that like is your point that it is not an easy process, and
Mm-mm.
even for someone as loudmouth as me who calls Christianity a cult for a living, it's still not always fun. Like and like
Yeah.
I don't like I don't in fact it's most often not fun, I'll say. And it's really hard work, and I still would rather do it than be a Christian any day.
Yeah. Yeah. And I tell people all the time, like my whole brand, my whole thing is being an atheist. My whole thing is being confident in my lack of belief. And
Yeah.
even I still go, okay, but what if? Just what if?
Yeah.
But I mean, what if hell is real? Like every once in a while, especially when I'm on
Mhm.
like a turbulent plane, I'm like,
Yeah, start throwing some
right,
Hail Marys
right.
or something just in
Yeah,
case.
yeah, it's like it's hard to get it to go away
Mm,
even when you are sure. Even like
yeah,
I'm not confident about a lot of things. There like I'm not an
yeah,
arrogant person, but I am
mhm,
confident that I believe that I there's just it's just nothing. Lights out, the
yeah,
end. Um but even then, just the fear was instilled.
mm,
The what we were told was in store for us was so bad that it was like,
yeah,
"Oh my but I mean, what if?"
mhm,
Like, why would
yeah,
millions of people think this if it wasn't? And you have to be like, "Stop it. Like, stop."
yeah,
Um,
certainly. I also
yeah.
think that another thing, same vein, is not only is it the like what if I mean I joke, I'm like, man, if I went back, I could have a hell of a testimony. Like I could really make some money selling a book if I really wanted to, and I could lie,
Yeah.
and who's to stop me? Of course, now I'm saying it on air, so like everyone would know. But I would never do that. I have an obnoxious integrity. But yeah, no, but it does like it is a whole system of belief, and especially when you grew up in it, it's not like something you can just like turn off someday. Like
Right.
it is hard work to change your neural paths, to find yourself, and to be who you really want to be.
Yeah. And to know while you're doing it that you are hurting so many people you still
Mm,
love.
yeah,
If the
that's tough.
minute they find out you're hurting them. Um, which is why I'm glad that most people I know don't listen to podcasts. Like, yeah, people are like, "So, like, what's it been like with your family finding out?" And I'm like, "They don't know." And then they're like, "Why?" And I'm
Yeah,
like, "'Cause they don't listen to podcasts." So I'm
yeah,
openly secretive about my atheism. Um,
yeah.
so if you had any advice for somebody who maybe hears themselves in your story, they were devoutly religious, they grew up in like steeped in this environment, they even went to school for it, they threw all this money and this time and this energy, they told people about it. Maybe they're even feeling bad because of so
Mm,
many people that they proselytized to and brought to the
mm,
church and spoke to. What would you say to them? How would you tell them to move forward?
mm. I struggle with advice questions because a lot of the time I'm like, I don't know. I'm like,
Don't ask
well,
me.
what's your situation? I mean, it's different for each person. I think, if I could go back to my younger self and like say some things, one would be, you are not nearly as ugly as you think you are. That would be like step one. Like
Yeah.
just frankly being like, all that self-loathing, it's someone else. It's not you. It's not. It's there on purpose. Someone purposely
Yes.
put that in you, and it's a crime. I mean, it's
Yeah.
terrible.
Yep.
But it's not something you need to keep. Um,
Right.
so that would be step one. If you want something more practical, I think your baby steps idea is great. Sleep in on a Sunday for a month. Like, don't go to church. Don't tell anyone you're dipping out. Just like dip out for a
Yeah.
bit. Or
Yeah.
like
You
if you're
don't
not,
have to tell anyone. You don't have to tell a soul. You don't have to announce it.
yeah, I find it best not to. I find it best to
Yeah.
be very introspective in these times and to like
Yep.
listen more than be slow to speak. No, like do the things that you need to do to kind of be in a calm state of mind, and really evaluate what it is that you want your life to be, and recognize that you have the autonomy to decide. There's always going to be societal barriers. There's always going to be influences that kind of guide your thinking about certain things, but you have way more autonomy than Christianity will ever teach you,
Yes.
and you have way more power than they want you to know. So take the time to figure out what you want to do with that autonomy and power. And if you want to claim it back, or if you want to give it up for a life of serving an uncertain ideology, I'm not here to tell you you have to leave the cult. I'm telling you, you'll feel a lot better if you did.
Yeah.
And I just, I do, I really just, what hurts is just knowing like the children in that environment who grow up thinking that getting hit is normal and
Yep.
think that it's somehow love, and then in their young adulthood think that like slam dunking on oppressed minorities is like points with God, and then like have to like backtrack on that and like try to like, that's hard. But there's people who will care about you. I would say give therapy a shot. I don't know if it's for everyone, but I think it's for everyone to try.
Right.
See if it helps. It helped me. It took a lot. It didn't help me instantly, but it did help me.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, I think you'll be okay. I
Yeah.
really do. I would be step by step about it, and unique to whatever you need, and not,
Yeah.
and don't look for someone else to solve it for you. I guess would be the
Right.
big piece of advice, is like, that is a
Right.
question you're gonna have to solve for yourself. No expert,
Right.
no book, no group, no nothing is going to like help you.
Yes.
You just gotta find it.
Yes. And the only thing I would add is, as you're looking for maybe a support system or a group, don't fall for another cult.
Yeah,
Don't do
it's
it.
hard.
If you're getting this right, if you're getting the same vibes, those should not be making you feel at home. If you feel at home, that's a problem, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, and something I think is helpful now is there are so many more online communities now than there were even 10 years ago when I was coming
Hmm.
out of it. When I was experiencing deconstruction, there were like 2 YouTube channels, and they all told me that I had to be like a yelling, screaming debater in order to be an atheist, and that I had to tell Christians they were stupid. And and honestly, that made me like turtle back in my shell for a while because I didn't think I was
Yeah.
ready for that. Um, but if you're listening, reach out to some of these communities. If there's a channel that you really like to
Hmm.
watch, maybe message the person who hosts the channel. If there's maybe a deconstruction meme Instagram page that you like to follow, maybe reach out to the person who runs that Instagram account, because so many of us have similar pathways that we took to get where we are. And even if I feel like deconstruction is never fully done. It's kind
Hmm.
of like a lot of like people who don't smoke anymore, people who don't drink anymore. That doesn't make them not alcoholics anymore. That doesn't make them not
Right.
smokers anymore. And I think growing up within a religion doesn't and deconstructing doesn't make you done. I don't think you're ever
Yeah.
done. I think it's like a process. And so we're all going through it. So reach out to me even if you want to. Or if you've got a comment for John, you can email me and I'll send it right to him. Or you can leave a comment in the comment form or in the comment section of whatever platform you're
Hmm.
watching or listening to this on. Because we gotta stick together out here without forming a cult. We can't form a
It's
cult.
tricky. I will say, one I'll plug, I mean, Recovering from Religion has some awesome resources.
Yes.
I've used them for
Yes.
different things, and I would say
Love them.
they're one of the reasons I appreciate them especially is, this is kind of just my own little soapbox. It's not like something everyone has to listen to or anything. I think there's a lot of value in seeing this, beyond the scope of Christianity.
Yes.
And seeing this, there's a reason I talk about cults, not just Christianity.
Yes.
Is you'll actually probably find better community and maybe a less triggering community if you start talking and listening to just cult survivors in general,
Yeah.
who maybe, whether it's Jehovah's Witness or Mormon, which is Christian related, but you might even find someone from a very peculiar cult or an MLM or like, all these different things. You'll
Yes.
actually be able to compare notes and not hear the same story over and over, which can kind of be a little triggering. And like,
Right.
just broaden your horizon a little bit. So
Yeah.
that's my own 2 cents. And Recovering from
Yeah.
Religion, they do a great job of kind of being more general and not as
Yeah.
specific. So they're a great resource.
Yep.
But again, I would start with introspection before
Yeah.
anything else, and really find out what it is you're looking for. And if you have questions, formulate them, write them down, do whatever you need to do, but like have the question completely formulated, and don't let
Yes.
someone else kind of take advantage of your like vulnerable state of mind and like write the question for you and then give the answer they want to
Right.
give.
Interesting. That's a good way to put that. That's a really good way to put that. Well, John Verner, thank you so much for your time. I pronounced that right, right?
Oh,
Verner?
so good.
Okay,
You did it
perfect.
so
Well, I
good.
realized I didn't say it earlier, so I was like, "What if it's Werner? What if it's Varner?"
Vana.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Well, John Werner, thank you
Yeah.
so much for your time. I really appreciate your time and your story. And for anybody listening or watching, I have linked your website. I've linked cultofchristianity.com. I've also linked jverner.com. Please check out John's content. It's really, really interesting, and you'll probably find something you like. And then I'll also link Recovering from Religion, because I agree. I second. They are a really phenomenal organization. But if anybody has any comments or questions or anything, post them in the comments or email me, and I'm happy to send them on to John. And we'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions. But John, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
This is awesome. Thank you so much.